The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Mineral Park, Arizona, as Delilah Rowe clutched her 5-year-old daughter's hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The wooden platform beneath her feet felt like it might give way any moment, or perhaps that was just her knees threatening to buckle, as the auctioneer's voice boomed across the crowd of dusty, weathered faces staring up at her. "Next up, we have this fine woman and her child. Strong back, good teeth. The little one comes with her. Starting bid at $50. Delilah fought back tears as she stood on that auction block in 1876, her life reduced to a transaction after the death of her husband had left her with insurmountable debts. She tried everything to keep their small homestead running, but without Thomas, the drought had taken what little they had left. Now, the bank had seized everything, and the law allowed for indentured servitude to clear remaining debts. 3 years of her life would belong to whoever bid highest today. "Mama, I'm scared," whispered little Charlotte, her honey-colored curls blowing in the hot Arizona breeze. "Hush now, sweetheart," Delilah murmured, trying to mask her terror with a steady voice. "Everything will be fine." But she knew that wasn't true. The last woman sold had been separated from her son, and the heartbreaking wails still echoed in Delilah's ears. The crowd began to shout numbers, each higher than the last. Delilah scanned the sea of faces: ranch hands looking for cheap labor, saloon owners seeking barmaids, wealthy widowers wanting a housekeeper. None looked particularly kind. Her throat tightened with each new bid. $65, called a red-faced man with tobacco-stained teeth. $70, countered a portly saloon owner whose reputation for cruelty to his workers was well known. As the bidding reached $90, Delilah's heart sank. The saloon owner was winning, and he'd already declared he had no use for a child. Charlotte would be sent to the orphanage, or worse, sold separately. $150. A deep voice cut through the crowd. The crowd parted, and Delilah saw him tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered Stetson pulled low over piercing blue eyes. His face was tan from the sun, his stance confident as he stepped forward. Whispers rippled through the gathering. "That's Wade Young," someone muttered. "Owns the Double Circle Ranch outside of town." The auctioneer grinned, pleased with the unexpected high bid. $150 going once. The saloon owner scowled but shook his head. Too steep for him. Going twice. Delilah held her breath, squeezing Charlotte's hand even tighter. "Sold. To Mr. Young for $150. The rancher approached the platform as the auctioneer handed him the papers to sign. Delilah could see him better now. His face was handsome but stern, with a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. He couldn't have been more than 35. "Sir," the auctioneer said quietly, though Delilah could still hear, "you understand the child isn't part of the labor contract." "She'll need to go to the orphanage unless—" "I'll take both," Wade Young interrupted, his voice firm and brooking no argument. "No separation." The auctioneer looked surprised but nodded, amending the papers. Wade signed with a flourish, then approached the steps where Delilah and Charlotte stood. "Madam," he said with a respectful nod, extending his hand to help her down. "My wagon's over yonder. Got a long ride ahead of us before sundown." Delilah hesitated, studying the man who now owned 3 years of her life. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you want both of us?" His blue eyes softened slightly, though his expression remained unreadable. "No child should be separated from their mother," he said simply. "Now come along. There's work waiting." With no choice but to follow, Delilah lifted Charlotte into her arms and stepped down from the auction block, her legs trembling. As they walked toward his wagon, she felt the stares of the townspeople burning into her back. Some pitied her, others envied the relatively high price she'd fetched. None interfered. The wagon was well maintained, with a team of strong bay horses harnessed to it. Wade helped them up onto the bench seat before climbing up himself. As he took the reins, Delilah noticed calluses on his hands. A working rancher, not just an owner who let others do the labor. "Mr. Young," she ventured as they pulled away from town, "What sort of work will I be doing at your ranch? Cooking, cleaning, general housekeeping," he replied without looking at her. "Previous housekeeper passed on 2 months back. Place needs a woman's touch." Charlotte sat between them, her small body pressed against Delilah's side. "Do you have other children at your ranch, mister?" she asked, her childish curiosity momentarily overcoming her fear. A shadow crossed Wade's face. "No, little one. It's just me, my foreman Hank, and 5 ranch hands." They rode in silence for a while, the wagon bouncing over the rutted dirt road. The landscape changed as they traveled, the sparse town buildings giving way to vast open country dotted with sagebrush and cacti. Mountains rose in the distance, purple against the dimming sky. "We'll be there before dark," Wade said eventually. "It's not a fancy place, but it's solid. You'll have your own room, you and the girl, Charlotte," Delilah said. "Her name is Charlotte," Wade nodded. "Charlotte." He glanced down at the child who had begun to doze against her mother's side. "Pretty name." "My husband named her," Delilah said softly, "before the fever took him." Wade's hands tightened on the reins. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Rowe." "It's Miss Rowe now," she corrected, looking out at the passing landscape. "Or I suppose it's whatever you choose to call me, Mr. Young." He frowned at that. "I'll call you Miss Rowe unless you tell me otherwise. Contract or not, I aim to treat you with respect." Delilah wanted to believe him, but experience had taught her that men's words often differed from their actions. Still, there was something in Wade Young's steady gaze that made her want to trust him. Perhaps it was simply that he hadn't separated her from Charlotte when he easily could have. As the sun dipped lower, the Double Circle Ranch came into view, a sprawling main house built of sturdy logs, a large barn, corral, bunkhouse, and several outbuildings. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was clearly prosperous. "Home," Wade said, a note of pride in his voice as he guided the horses toward the house. As they pulled up in front of the porch, a weathered man with graying hair emerged from the barn. "That the new housekeeper, boss?" he called. "This is Miss Rowe and her daughter Charlotte," Wade confirmed, setting the brake and jumping down from the wagon. "Miss Rowe, this is Hank Miller, my foreman. Known him since I was knee-high to a grasshopper." Hank approached, removing his hat politely. "Madam, little miss." "Welcome to Double Circle." Delilah nodded, accepting Wade's help down from the wagon. Charlotte had awakened and was staring wide-eyed at the ranch, her fatigue temporarily forgotten in the excitement of new surroundings. "Is that a real cowboy, Mama?" she whispered loudly, pointing at a young man leading a horse toward the corral. Despite everything, Delilah smiled. "Yes, sweetheart, there are real cowboys here." Wade cleared his throat. "Let me show you to your quarters, and then Hank can give you a tour of the kitchen. There's stew keeping warm on the stove for supper." He led them into the house, which was surprisingly spacious inside. The main room had a large stone fireplace, comfortable-looking furniture, and bookshelves filled with volumes that suggested Wade Young was more educated than most ranchers. "Through here," he said, leading them down a hallway off the main room. He opened a door to reveal a clean, modest bedroom with a double bed, small dresser, and rocking chair by the window. A washstand stood in the corner with a pitcher and basin. "This will be yours," he said. "Bathrooms down the hall. We have indoor plumbing, one of the luxuries I insisted on when I built this place." Delilah couldn't hide her surprise. Indoor plumbing was rare in these parts, especially on a ranch. "Thank you, Mr. Young. This is more comfortable than I expected," he nodded. "Get settled in. Supper's in an hour. Kitchen's at the back of the house when you're ready." After he left, Delilah sat on the edge of the bed, Charlotte bouncing beside her. "Mama, is this our home now?" Charlotte asked. Delilah smoothed her daughter's curls. "For now, sweetheart, for now." She wondered what sort of man Wade Young truly was. He'd paid a high price for her contract and insisted on keeping Charlotte with her. His home was comfortable, and he'd been polite, if distant. But Delilah knew better than to judge a man by first impressions. 3 years stretched before her, 3 years under this man's authority. As she unpacked their meager belongings, she made a silent vow. Whatever happened, She would protect Charlotte and find a way to build a better life once her contract was fulfilled. And in the meantime, she would remain wary of Wade Young and his inexplicable kindness. In her experience, nothing came without a price. The kitchen at Double Circle Ranch was larger than any Delilah had ever worked in, with a massive cast iron stove, spacious work tables, and well-stocked pantry. As Hank showed her around, pointing out where everything was kept, she mentally cataloged what she would need to prepare breakfast for 8 people come morning. "Boss likes his coffee strong," Hank explained, showing her the coffee grinder. "And the men start early breakfast at 5 sharp." Delilah nodded, Charlotte trailing behind her, exploring cupboards and peering into containers with childish curiosity. "I'm used to early mornings, Mr. Miller." "Just Hank, madam. We ain't much for formalities round here, 'cept the boss. He keeps to himself mostly." As if summoned by mention of his name, Wade appeared in the doorway. He'd removed his hat and coat and washed up. His dark hair was damp at the temples, and without the shadow of his hat brim, Delilah could see that his eyes were the color of a summer sky. "Everything to your satisfaction, Miss Rowe?" he asked. "Yes, thank you." She gestured to the pot of stew simmering on the stove. "Should I serve supper now?" Wade nodded. "The men eat in the bunkhouse, but Hank and I take meals here. Charlotte is welcome at the table, of course." The meal was a quiet affair. Wade seemed lost in thought, responding to Hank's occasional comments about ranch business with short answers. Charlotte, initially shy, grew bolder when Wade offered her an extra biscuit with honey. "Thank you, Mr. Young," she said politely, using the manners Delilah had worked hard to instill. "You're welcome," he replied, the hint of a smile softening his features momentarily. After dinner, as Delilah cleared the dishes, Wade lingered at the table. "Miss Rowe, I should explain your duties more clearly," he said. "You'll be responsible for the cooking, cleaning, laundry, and general upkeep of the house. The men have their own cook at the bunkhouse for lunch, but you'll prepare breakfast and supper for everyone. Sundays are lighter work, just meals. You'll have time to yourself in the afternoons." "I understand, Mr. Young." Delilah placed the dishes in the wash basin. "What about Charlotte?" she asked, glancing at her daughter who was exploring the main room under Hank's watchful eye. "She's welcome anywhere on the ranch house grounds," Wade said. "Though I'd appreciate if you'd keep her away from the corrals unless accompanied. Some of our horses aren't gentle." Delilah nodded, relieved that Charlotte would have some freedom. "She's accustomed to amusing herself while I work." Wade hesitated, then added, "There's a schoolhouse 10 miles from here. When she's old enough, I'll arrange transportation." Surprised by his consideration, Delilah turned to face him. "That's very generous, Mr. Young." Something flickered in his eyes, perhaps discomfort at her gratitude. "Education's important. My mother taught school before she married. She'd have wanted it that way." Before Delilah could respond, Charlotte came running back into the kitchen, excitement lighting up her face. "Mama, Mr. Hank showed me a picture book with horses in it." "Can I look at it again tomorrow?" Wade stood. "Keep it in your room if you like," he said to Charlotte. "There are more books in the shelves. You're welcome to any that interest you." With that, he bid them good night and retreated to what Delilah presumed was his study at the far end of the house, leaving her wondering about the complexities of the man who now controlled her future. The following days established a routine. Delilah rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, seeing to it that hot coffee, biscuits, eggs, and bacon were ready when the ranch hands filed in at 5. She learned their names quickly: Miguel, Cooper, Finn, Joe, and a young man barely out of his teens called Rusty for his shock of red hair. They were respectful if somewhat reserved, clearly taking their cue from their employer. The house, while not neglected, showed signs of having been without a woman's touch. Delilah threw herself into cleaning, grateful for the work that kept her mind occupied. Charlotte adapted to ranch life with the resilience of childhood, finding hiding places in the garden and befriending a stray cat that lived in the barn. Wade was often absent during the day, working alongside his men, returning dusty and tired in the evenings. He rarely spoke during meals beyond thanking Delilah for the food, but she occasionally caught him watching Charlotte with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, something between curiosity and sadness. On her fourth night at the ranch, after Charlotte had been put to bed, Delilah was folding laundry in the kitchen when Wade entered. He looked surprised to find her still up. "You should rest, Miss Rowe," he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee from the pot she kept warm on the stove. "Dawn comes early. I wanted to finish these," she explained, smoothing a wrinkle from one of his shirts. He watched her for a moment. "Your husband," he said suddenly. "What did he do?" Surprised by the personal question, Delilah set down the shirt she was folding. "Thomas was a farmer. We had a small homestead near Prescott, but the drought—" She trailed off, the memory of their struggle still painful. Wade nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Cruel country sometimes. May I ask you something, Mr. Young?" When he nodded, she continued, "Why did you pay so much for my contract? $150 is far more than the going rate." Wade looked down into his coffee cup. "Man shouldn't profit from another's misfortune," he said simply. "And no child should be motherless if it can be helped." There was something in his tone, a personal knowledge of loss, that made Delilah wonder about his past. But before she could ask another question, he changed the subject. "You've done good work here already. The place hasn't been this clean since, well, in a long time." "Thank you," she said, returning to her folding. "Mr. Young, I notice the vegetable garden is rather neglected. With your permission, I'd like to get it producing again. It would save money on provisions." His eyebrows rose slightly, as if impressed by her practical thinking. "Do as you see fit. Hank can have one of the boys help with the heavy digging." As the days turned into weeks, Delilah fell into the rhythm of ranch life. The vegetable garden flourished under her care. Charlotte befriended every animal on the property, and the house began to feel less like a workplace and more like a home. She learned more about Wade through observation than conversation. He was fair with his men, generous with praise when earned, and quick to lend a hand with difficult tasks rather than merely giving orders. He read voraciously in the evenings, often history books or occasionally poetry. And though he maintained a certain distance, she occasionally caught glimpses of gentleness, the way he spoke softly to nervous horses, how he lifted Charlotte onto his shoulders once to show her a bird's nest, his patience when teaching Rusty to mend tack. One hot afternoon in July, nearly a month after her arrival, Delilah was hanging laundry when she heard Charlotte scream. Dropping the sheet she was holding, she ran toward the sound, her heart pounding. She found Charlotte near the garden, frozen in terror as a coiled rattlesnake prepared to strike. Before Delilah could reach her, Wade appeared from nowhere, scooping Charlotte up with one arm while dispatching the snake with a well-aimed shot from the pistol in his other hand. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, checking Charlotte for injuries as Delilah rushed to them. "And no," Charlotte whimpered, clinging to him. "It hissed at me." Wade's face, usually composed, showed naked relief. He handed Charlotte to Delilah but kept one hand on the child's back, as if unwilling to break contact until he was certain she was safe. "Thank you," Delilah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "If you hadn't been here, but I was," he interrupted gently. Then, to Charlotte, "You need to be careful around here, little one. Always watch where you're stepping, especially near rocks and brush." Charlotte nodded solemnly. "Are you angry with me, Mr. Wade?" It was the first time she'd used his first name, and something in his expression softened. "No, Charlotte, I'm not angry. Just concerned for your safety." That evening, after Charlotte was asleep, Delilah found Wade on the porch, smoking a cigarette as he looked out at the star-filled sky. She joined him, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders against the night air. "I never properly thanked you for today," she said quietly. He shook his head. "No thanks needed. Nevertheless, you have my gratitude." She hesitated, then added, "You're good with her. Have you never married, Mr. Young?" A long silence followed, and Delilah thought he might not answer. Finally, he tapped ash from his cigarette. "I was married once, briefly." Something in his tone warned her not to press, but he continued without prompting. "Her name was Sarah. We had a son." His voice was flat, as if reciting facts rather than personal history. Influenza took them both 8 years ago. Boy was just 2. I'm so sorry, Delilah said, understanding now his insistence that Charlotte remain with her. To lose both. Changed everything, he admitted. Built this place for them. Afterward, couldn't bring myself to leave it, even though every corner holds memories. Impulsively, she touched his arm. Your kindness to Charlotte and me, it means more knowing what you've lost. He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then met her eyes. For a moment, something passed between them, an understanding, a connection deeper than employer and servant. Then he straightened, the moment broken. Getting late. You should rest. As August gave way to September, subtle changes occurred at Double Circle Ranch. Wade began taking his meals more regularly with Delilah and Charlotte, rather than eating quickly and returning to work. He brought back small gifts from his infrequent trips to town: candy for Charlotte, fabric for Delilah to make a new dress, a picture book about desert animals. One evening he asked Charlotte if she'd like to learn to ride. A real horse, she gasped, eyes wide with excitement. Got a gentle mare perfect for beginners, he said, a rare smile lighting his face at her enthusiasm. If your mother approves. Delilah hesitated. Horseback riding wasn't without risks, but Charlotte had adapted to ranch life and showed good sense for her age. As long as you're with her, she agreed. The following Sunday afternoon, Delilah watched from the fence as Wade led a docile pinto mare around the small corral. Charlotte perched proudly on its back, her face alight with joy. Wade's hand never left the small of her back, ensuring she couldn't fall, his attention completely focused on her safety. He's different with them around, Hank commented, coming to stand beside Delilah. Hasn't been this at ease since before he lost Sarah and the boy. He told me about them, Delilah said softly. Hank looked surprised. Did he now? Took me 2 years to get the full story, and I've known him since he was born. The foreman studied her face. You're good for him, Miss Rowe, you and the little one both. Delilah felt a blush rise to her cheeks. I'm just doing my job, Hank. MMHMM, the older man replied non-committally, but his knowing smile suggested he believed otherwise. That night, unable to sleep, Delilah heard the faint notes of a harmonica drifting through the house. Following the sound, she found Wade sitting alone in the main room, playing a haunting melody in the dim light of a single lamp. He stopped when he saw her. Did I wake you? No, she assured him, tightening the belt of her robe. I couldn't sleep. He set the harmonica aside. My father taught me to play, said every cowboy needs to know how. It's beautiful, she said, moving farther into the room. Sad though, old lullaby, used to play it for my son. He motioned to the chair across from him. Join me if you like. She sat, aware that this was the first time they'd been truly alone together in a setting that wasn't about work. In the lamplight, his face looked younger, the lines of responsibility softened. Charlotte loved her riding lesson today, she said. It's all she talked about before falling asleep. A smile tugged at his lips. She's a natural, fearless. Like her father, Delilah said. Thomas would break wild horses for extra money sometimes. It terrified me, but he loved it. You loved him very much, Wade observed. Delilah nodded. We married young. I was 18, he was 20. We had good years before the hard times came. And after he died, no one to help you keep the farm. My parents are gone. Thomas had no family to speak of. She sighed. I tried everything, taking in washing, selling eggs, even sewing for the mercantile. But the bank wanted its money, and with the drought. She trailed off. You know the rest. Wade was quiet for a long moment. Laws unjust, selling people's labor to clear debts. It's not far from slavery, just dressed up legal. Yet you bought my contract, she pointed out gently. His blue eyes met hers. Lesser of two evils. You'd have been separated from Charlotte otherwise. Why does that matter so much to you? She asked, though she thought she already knew the answer. He looked away into the darkness beyond the window. After Sarah and my boy died, I wondered why I'd been spared. Seemed cruel living when they couldn't. His voice dropped lower. Took a long time to find purpose again. When I saw you and Charlotte on that auction block, something just clicked into place. Couldn't stand by and watch another child lose their mother. Delilah felt tears prick her eyes at the raw honesty in his voice. "You're a good man, Wade Young." He looked back at her, surprise registering at her use of his first name. "Not always," he said, "but I try to be." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the ticking of the clock and the occasional pop from the banked fire in the hearth. Neither seemed inclined to end the moment, this quiet understanding in the night's stillness. Finally, Delilah rose. "I should try to sleep." "Morning comes early." Wade nodded, but as she turned to go, he spoke again. "Delilah," she paused, the sound of her name on his lips sending an unexpected warmth through her. "Yes, I'm glad you're here," he said simply. "Both of you." As she returned to her room, Delilah found herself confronting an uncomfortable truth. She was developing feelings for Wade Young. Feelings that complicated her already precarious situation. She was his servant, bound by contract. Any attention he showed her could simply be kindness, nothing more. And yet, the way he'd looked at her tonight, the openness with which he'd shared his pain, it suggested something beyond the boundaries of their arrangement, something neither of them had anticipated when she stepped onto that auction block 3 months ago. As summer gave way to autumn, life at Double Circle fell into a comfortable pattern. Delilah's cooking and homemaking transformed the ranch house into a true home. The men began lingering over breakfast, drawn by fresh bread and friendly conversation. Even Wade, once so reserved, now joined in discussions and occasionally shared stories from his youth. Charlotte blossomed in the wide open spaces of the ranch. Her riding lessons with Wade continued, and she proved to be a natural. By October, she could ride her gentle mare, whom she'd named Blossom, around the small corral without assistance, though Wade always watched nearby. One crisp autumn morning, Delilah was gathering the last tomatoes from her garden when Wade approached, leading his stallion. "Thought you might like to see the property," he said, seeming almost hesitant. "Weather's perfect for riding." Delilah wiped her hands on her apron. "I'd like that, but what about Charlotte? Hank's teaching her to make corn husk dolls. They'll be occupied for hours." He smiled slightly. "Besides, she insisted I show you the waterfall." Minutes later, Delilah found herself seated sideways in front of Wade on his horse, acutely aware of his arm around her waist as he guided the animal along a rocky trail that wound up into the hills behind the ranch. "Land stretches nearly 20 miles that way," he said, pointing west. "Good grazing mostly. Creek runs year-round, even in drought years." As they climbed higher, the vegetation changed, junipers and pines replacing the scrubby desert growth. The air grew cooler, fragrant with pine resin. "It's beautiful," Delilah said, taking in the panoramic view of the valley below. "I had no idea the ranch was so vast." "My father started with 50 acres, Wade explained. "Built it acre by acre over 30 years. I've added another 1,000 since taking over." "You must be proud of what you've accomplished." He was quiet for a moment, his breath warm against her hair. "Meant to share it with Sarah and our son. For a long time after losing them, none of it mattered. Land, cattle, money seemed pointless without family to share it." The vulnerability in his voice touched something deep within Delilah. She understood loss, the emptiness it left behind. Without thinking, she covered his hand with hers where it rested at her waist. "And now?" she asked softly. He didn't answer immediately, but his arm tightened almost imperceptibly around her. "Now, things are changing." They rode in companionable silence until they reached a clearing where the sound of rushing water filled the air. Wade dismounted and helped Delilah down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Charlotte's waterfall," he said, leading her through a stand of pines. The sight took Delilah's breath away. A ribbon of water cascaded down moss-covered rocks into a clear pool below, surrounded by ferns and wildflowers. The morning sun created rainbows in the spray. "Oh," she breathed. "It's like something from a storybook." Wade watched her face, seeming to take pleasure in her delight. "Found it by accident years ago, tracking a stray calf. Never showed anyone but you." The intimacy of the statement wasn't lost on Delilah. She turned to him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how alone in this secluded paradise. "Thank you for sharing it with me," she said. His eyes, bluer than the autumn sky above them, searched her face. Something shifted in his expression, resolve giving way to longing. Slowly, giving her every chance to retreat, he raised his hand to her cheek. "Delilah," he said, her name like a prayer on his lips. She leaned into his touch, her heart racing. "Wade." When his lips met hers, it was gentle, questioning. She answered by sliding her hands up to his shoulders, drawing him closer. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness dissolving in the connection between them. When they finally parted, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "I didn't plan this," he said hoarsely. "Didn't bring you here for this." "I know," she assured him, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I've felt it too, whatever this is between us." He took her hands in his. "You're not obligated, Delilah. Your contract, this has nothing to do with that," she interrupted firmly. "What I feel for you, it's not because I'm bound to your service." Relief washed over his features. "I've been fighting it, telling myself it wasn't proper given our situation. But these past months, seeing you with Charlotte, watching you bring life back to the ranch to me." She silenced him with another kiss, shorter but no less meaningful. "We should return," she said reluctantly. "Charlotte will wonder where we are." The ride back was different, charged with new awareness. Wade held her closer, occasionally pressing his lips to her hair when the trail allowed him to relax his vigilance. By unspoken agreement, they decided to keep this change in their relationship private for now, at least until they understood better what it meant for their future. But some things couldn't be hidden. When they returned to the ranch yard, Hank was waiting with Charlotte, who ran to greet them. The foreman took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly before discreetly busying himself with the horse. That evening, after Charlotte was asleep, Wade and Delilah sat before the fire, his arm around her shoulders as they talked late into the night. He spoke of his childhood on the ranch, his brief time at a university back east, his dreams for the future. She told him about growing up in a small town in Missouri, her journey west with Thomas, the joy of Charlotte's birth. In the weeks that followed, their relationship deepened. They were careful to maintain propriety around the ranch hands, but private moments were filled with gentle touches, stolen kisses, and growing affection. Wade began reading aloud in the evenings, Charlotte curled on one side of him, Delilah on the other. Charlotte, perceptive as children often are, noticed the change. One night as Delilah tucked her into bed, she asked, "Do you love Mr. Wade, Mama?" Delilah brushed curls from her daughter's forehead, considering how to answer. "I care for him very much," she said carefully. "I think he loves us," Charlotte declared with childish certainty. "He looks at you the way Papa used to." Tears pricked Delilah's eyes. "Would that make you happy, sweetheart? If Mr. Wade cared for us that way," Charlotte nodded solemnly. "He makes you smile again. And he taught me to ride Blossom." Out of the mouths of babes, Delilah thought, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Sleep now. We'll see what tomorrow brings." What tomorrow brought was an early winter storm howling down from the mountains with little warning. By midday, snow was falling heavily, and Wade and his men were rushing to bring cattle down from the high pastures. Delilah kept the stove stoked and soup simmering, worry growing as the hours passed and the storm intensified. Charlotte pressed her face to the window, watching the swirling white landscape. "Will Mr. Wade be okay, Mama?" she asked, her breath fogging the glass. "Of course," Delilah assured her, praying she was right. "He knows this land better than anyone." It was nearly dark when the men finally returned, snow-covered and exhausted but successful in bringing the herd to shelter. Wade was the last to enter, stamping snow from his boots in the mudroom. His face was red from cold, his expression grim. "Lost 2 steers," he reported as Delilah helped him remove his frozen coat. "Could have been worse." She pressed a mug of hot coffee into his hands. "You're half frozen yourself. Get by the fire before you catch your death." He caught her hand, his icy fingers wrapping around her warm ones. "Worried about me, were you?" The tenderness in his eyes belied his teasing tone. Delilah squeezed his hand. Of course I was. After a hot meal and dry clothes, Wade's mood lightened. The storm raged outside, but inside the ranch house was warm and secure. As the evening wore on, Charlotte fell asleep on the rug before the fire, exhausted from the day's excitement. "I'll take her to bed," Wade offered, lifting the child effortlessly in his arms. Delilah followed as he carried Charlotte to her room, marveling at the gentle way he laid her on the bed and pulled the quilt over her. He brushed a tender kiss on the sleeping child's forehead before straightening. "She's precious to you," Delilah observed softly. Wade nodded, his eyes never leaving Charlotte's peaceful face. "She reminds me of my son sometimes, that same curiosity, the way she looks at the world with such wonder." He turned to Delilah. "But she's her own person. Special." "Wade," Delilah began, her heart pounding. "I need to ask you something." He took her hand, leading her from the room and closing Charlotte's door softly behind them. In the hallway, illuminated only by a single lamp, he faced her. "Ask." "What are we doing?" she whispered. "Where is this leading us, I mean?" His expression grew serious. "Where do you want it to lead?" "I care for you," she admitted. "More than I thought possible after losing Thomas. But my contract—" "Damn the contract," he interrupted, his voice low but intense. "I'll tear it up tomorrow. It should never have existed in the first place." Delilah shook her head. "And then what? If I'm not bound by contract, what am I? Your housekeeper still." "Something else." Wade took her face in his hands. "You'd be whatever you choose to be, Delilah, free to stay or go as you please." "And if I choose to stay?" she asked, barely breathing. His thumbs traced her cheekbones. "Then I'd hope it would be as my wife, not my employee." The word hung between them, wife carrying the weight of all it promised. Delilah's heart soared even as caution urged restraint. "It's too soon," she whispered. "We've known each other only a few months." "I knew the first time I saw you on that auction block," Wade confessed. "Holding Charlotte's hand, chin up despite everything. Something in me recognized you, like finding a piece I didn't know was missing." Tears filled Delilah's eyes. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of depending on someone again, of losing everything a second time." "I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen," Wade said honestly. "But I can promise to face whatever comes together, to protect you and Charlotte with everything I have." His voice dropped lower. "I love you, Delilah Rowe. Love you both." The words, so simply spoken, broke the last of her resistance. "I love you too," she whispered, rising on tiptoe to meet his kiss. The snowstorm raged for 3 days, effectively cutting off the ranch from the outside world. During that time, something shifted in the household. Wade moved Delilah's few belongings into the master bedroom, and they no longer hid their relationship from the ranch hands. On the morning the sun finally broke through, Wade called everyone together in the main room. Hank, the ranch hands, Delilah, and Charlotte gathered, curious about the announcement. Wade stood tall, one arm around Delilah's waist. "I have something to say," he began. "As you've probably noticed, things have changed between Miss Rowe and myself." Rusty, the young red-headed cowboy, snickered until Hank silenced him with a look. "I've asked Delilah to marry me," Wade continued, "and she's agreed." A cheer went up from the men. Charlotte bounced with excitement, having been told just moments before. Hank stepped forward to shake Wade's hand and kiss Delilah's cheek. "About time," the foreman said gruffly. "Been watching you two dance around each other for months." Wade raised his hand for silence. "One more thing. This," he produced Delilah's contract from his pocket, "is no longer valid." With deliberate movements, he tore the document into pieces and cast them into the fireplace. "No wife of mine will be bound by contract," he said firmly. "And until we're married, Delilah stays as my guest, not my employee." The symbolism of the gesture brought tears to Delilah's eyes. She had been prepared to honor the contract, to work the full 3 years if necessary. That Wade would relinquish his legal claim on her labor, essentially forgiving a considerable debt, moved her deeply. The days that followed were busy with preparations. Wade insisted on a proper wedding, not the simple ceremony Delilah had expected. He sent Hank to Prescott for a dressmaker, who arrived with trunks of fabrics and patterns. A minister was engaged, and invitations were dispatched to neighboring ranches. Is all this really necessary? Delilah asked one evening as they reviewed the guest list. I'd be happy with just us, Charlotte and Hank. Wade looked up from his writing desk. You deserve a real wedding, Delilah, not something hurried or secret. She touched his hand. But why rush at all? We could wait until spring when travel is easier. A shadow crossed his face. Life's too uncertain to wait for perfect timing. I learned that with Sarah. He squeezed her fingers. If you want to wait, we will, but I'm ready to call you my wife now. How could she argue with such sentiment? Christmas then, she agreed. We'll marry at Christmas. The date was set for December 24th. As the day approached, the ranch buzzed with activity. Pine boughs and red ribbons decorated the house, and the delicious smells of Delilah's holiday baking filled the air. Charlotte threw herself into wedding preparations with enthusiasm, practicing her role as flower girl until she had it perfect. Wade surprised them both with a special gift, a beautiful white pony for Charlotte with a red ribbon around its neck. Every rancher's daughter needs her own mount, he said as Charlotte squealed with delight. The wedding day dawned clear and cold. The landscape transformed into a glistening white wonderland by a fresh snowfall. Guests began arriving by mid-morning, neighboring ranchers and their families. The doctor from town, even the banker who had once seized Delilah's farm, invited, Wade explained, to see what true prosperity looked like. Delilah prepared in what would soon be her and Wade's bedroom, assisted by the wife of a neighboring rancher. Her dress was simple but elegant ivory satin with lace trim, her hair adorned with a crown of winter berries and pine. A knock sounded at the door and Hank's voice called, "Everyone's ready, Miss Delilah." Taking a deep breath, she opened the door to find the foreman waiting to escort her, Charlotte already in position at the top of the stairs, basket of dried flower petals in hand. "You look beautiful, madam," Hank said, offering his arm. "Boss is about to burst with pride down there." The main room had been transformed, furniture moved aside to create an aisle between rows of chairs. A small altar stood before the fireplace, where the minister waited alongside Wade. When Delilah appeared at the top of the stairs, a hush fell over the assembled guests. Wade's face, when she saw it, nearly undid her composure. The love in his eyes, the barely contained joy as he watched her descend the stairs behind Charlotte's careful procession of flower petals, told her everything she needed to know about the rightness of this decision. The ceremony was brief, but meaningful. They spoke traditional vows, their voices steady with conviction. When Wade slipped the ring onto her finger, his mother's ring, he told her earlier his hands were sure and warm around hers. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "Mr. Young, you may kiss your bride." Wade's kiss was tender, respectful of their audience yet conveying a promise of deeper passion to come. When they turned to face their guests as Mr. and Mrs. Wade Young, Charlotte rushed forward to embrace them both. Wade lifted the child into his arms. "Well, Miss Charlotte, what do you think? Are you happy with your new papa?" Charlotte's answer was to throw her arms around his neck and plant a noisy kiss on his cheek, bringing laughter from the guests. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music from a hastily assembled band of cowboys, dancing in the cleared main room, and a feast that showcased Delilah's considerable culinary skills. As darkness fell, guests began departing, leaving the family alone with Hank and the ranch hands. "One more surprise," Wade announced, retrieving a document from his desk. He knelt before Charlotte, bringing himself to her eye level. "Charlotte, I'd like to adopt you legally as my daughter. Would that be all right with you?" The child's eyes widened. "Would I be Charlotte Young then?" "Like you and Mama," Wade nodded, his expression solemn. "If you want to be." "Yes, please." Charlotte threw her arms around him once more over her head. Wade's eyes met Delilah's, seeking confirmation. The tears of joy on her face were answer enough. Later, when Charlotte was asleep and they were finally alone in their bedroom, Delilah stood by the window, watching snowflakes drift past in the moonlight. Wade's arms encircled her from behind, his chin resting on her head. "Happy, Mrs. Young," he murmured against her hair. She turned in his embrace. "More than I thought possible 6 months ago." Her fingers traced the line of his jaw. "When I stood on that auction block, I thought my life was ending. Instead, it was just beginning." "I thanked God every day for leading me to town that day," Wade said, drawing her closer. "Even when I was fighting my feelings for you, trying to maintain proper distance." Delilah smiled. "You weren't very successful at that." "Thankfully," he agreed, lowering his mouth to hers. Their kiss deepened, no longer restrained by propriety or uncertainty. They had waited, maintaining boundaries until marriage despite their growing feelings. Now, as husband and wife, they were free to express the passion that had simmered beneath the surface. Wade lifted her into his arms and carried her to their bed. "I love you, Delilah Young," he whispered as he laid her gently on the quilt. "Today, tomorrow, always." "And I love you," she replied, drawing him down to her. "My cowboy who wouldn't let us be separated." As the December night deepened outside their window, they found in each other's arms the completion of a journey neither had expected to make, from auction block to altar, from loss to love, from broken pasts to a future full of promise. Spring came to Mineral Park early that year, turning the desert landscape into a riot of wildflowers. At Double Circle Ranch, the changes were even more profound. Wade had expanded the house, adding 2 new bedrooms and enlarging the kitchen to Delilah's specifications. The vegetable garden now covered twice its original area, supplemented by a small orchard of apple and peach trees. Charlotte, officially Charlotte Young after the adoption was finalized in February, had blossomed like the desert flowers. Now 6 years old, she rode her pony with confidence, helped Delilah with gardening, and charmed the ranch hands into teaching her to rope. She called Wade Papa with natural ease, as if he had always been her father. On a warm April morning, Delilah stood on the porch, one hand resting on her slightly rounded belly. 4 months along, the new life growing within her was their secret joy, a baby that would join their family in late summer. She watched as Wade led Charlotte through the corral on her pony, his patience infinite as he demonstrated a new riding technique. His face, once so stern and closed, now frequently broke into smiles. The grief that had marked him when they first met hadn't disappeared. Such losses never truly vanish, but it had transformed, making room for new happiness. They had come so far from that day on the auction block. Sometimes Delilah still marveled at the journey, how the darkest moment of her life had led to this brightness. This family forged not from obligation, but from love freely given and received. Wade looked up, catching her watching them. He said something to Charlotte, who nodded and continued practicing on her own. Then he crossed to the porch, taking the steps 2 at a time. "How are my girls this morning?" he asked, his hand joining hers over their unborn child. "We're perfect," Delilah answered, leaning into his embrace. "Absolutely perfect." Wade's kiss tasted of sunshine and promises kept, of a future secured through love's redemptive power. As Charlotte's delighted laughter floated across the yard, Delilah gave silent thanks for the man who had refused to separate a mother and child, and in doing so, had created something precious beyond measure, a family bound not by contracts or obligation, but by the strongest ties of all: love, trust, and the courage to begin again. In the years that followed, the Double Circle Ranch prospered, expanding its boundaries and its family. Delilah gave birth to a son in August, whom they named James Thomas, young James for Wade's father and Thomas, to honor Delilah's first husband's memory. 2 years later, twin girls joined the family, keeping the ranch house filled with laughter and activity. Charlotte grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's spirit and her adoptive father's affinity for the land. At 18, she surprised no one by accepting a proposal from Rusty, the once young ranch hand who had matured into Wade's trusted foreman after Hank's retirement. On warm summer evenings, Wade and Delilah often sat on the porch, watching their children play in the yard where once only silence had reigned. Sometimes Wade would take out his harmonica, the sad lullaby now replaced by livelier tunes that set little feet dancing. "Did you ever imagine this?" Delilah would sometimes ask. "That day at the auction." And Wade would always shake his head, wonder in his eyes as he surveyed their life together. "Never imagined, but always hoped," he'd answer, drawing her close. That something good could come from something so wrong. In the end, it was love that had transformed them both, a love born in unusual circumstances, but grown strong through choice and commitment. The contract that had once bound Delilah to service had long since turned to ash, but the vows they had freely spoken to each other continued to shape their lives, creating a legacy of love that would echo through generations at Double Circle Ranch. And sometimes, when the desert moonlight silvered the landscape and their children slept peacefully under the ranch house roof, Wade and Delilah would ride together to the waterfall where they had first acknowledged their feelings. There, under the stars, they would renew in whispers the promise that had begun with 7 simple words spoken by a lonely rancher on an auction block. "I'll take both. No separation." A promise fulfilled beyond either's wildest dreams.